Welcome to the first part of the biological approach. I just want to turn your attention to the specification check on page 54 of your booklet. This is what you need to know this year. So that will be the influence of genes, biological structures, and neurochemistry on behavior. We will also look at genotype and phenotype, the genetic basis of behavior, and then evolution and behavior. Before we have a look at the first section, I'd like you to have a look at page 55 in your booklet, where it says the biological approach to psychology, as it's important to understand what this means initially before we get going on the detail. So, the biological approach views human beings as biological organisms. Therefore, it explains all psychological processes as being determined by biology, meaning the body. All that is psychological is physiological. So that means all thoughts or behaviors must have a biological cause. Biological psychologists are particularly interested in the role of genetics in determining behavior and how characteristics can be passed down through generations. Chemical and hormonal changes in the nervous system, neurochemistry are also very important areas of research. And more recently, psychologists have become interested in how Charles Darwin's ideas about biological evolution might apply to human behavior, allowing us to understand the original adaptive significance of behaviors such as mate selection or regression. So, the first term we're going to have a look at is heredity. So, heredity is the passing of characteristics from one generation to the next via genes. This is the reason why offspring often take after their parents in terms of psychological characteristics. So, genes carry instructions for a particular characteristic, for example, intelligence or temperament. How this characteristic develops depends on how the gene interacts with other genes and partly on how it interacts with the environment as well. And this is where we come on to the nature-nurture debate, which concerns whether behavior is determined by nature influence, that's your genes, evolution, or hormones, or whether nurture has more of an influence, and that is the environment, your culture, or any kind of social variables. So when we look at the nature-nurture debate, the central question is the extent to which our behavior is determined by the genes we inherit from our parents versus the influence of environmental factors. Such as home, school, and friends. So the extreme positions would be that behavior is entirely determined by genes or by our environment. The answer is that most behavior reflects a combination of the two. So you're never going to be in those extreme positions. We're always going to have a look at a combination of nature versus nurture in terms of explaining behavior. So, an example here is perhaps the most controversial idea that has been the study of intelligence as measured by IQ. If intelligence is entirely determined by inherited genetic factors, it would imply that educational programs for deprived groups in society are largely a waste of time. We generally don't do IQ tests anymore. In the 70s and 80s, they were quite popular for school children, but we don't do that much anymore. But this is an example of where it can become quite difficult, the nature-nurture debate. So more generally, the role of genes has been investigated in most areas of psychology. These include the development of perception, aggressive behavior, eating disorders, and many other psychopathologies, as well as gender role development and addictive behavior. So, different approaches in psychology place different emphasis on nature and nurture. For example, the biological approach tends to emphasize genetic influences rather than the environment. The behaviorist approach, on the other hand, assumes that all behavior is caused by learning, environmental, and that it's got nothing to do with our genetic inheritance and has no role for inherited factors. And then we've got the psychodynamic approach, which you will come across as well, assumes innate or inherited drives are modified by early experience, representing that interaction of genes and environment. So a little bit more in the middle of that debate. So two important areas we need to consider when we're talking about genes are the genotype and the phenotype. So there is an important difference between genotype, the genetic code that is written in the DNA of an individual cells, and then the phenotype, which is the physical appearance that results from this inherited information. So if you look at an example on the screen, you have flamingos who do not have pink encoded onto their genotype, but the environment, the observed characteristics, the phenotype can affect the way they look. So the food that flamingos eat either makes their phenotype white or pink. So the genetic basis of behavior. So each individual possesses a unique combination of genetic instructions. Therefore, we will differ from each other in terms of personality, intelligence, and abilities. So the concept of heritability plays a central role in the psychology of how different we are from each other. And our individual differences will be determined by the way the genotype and the phenotype interact. So do follow the link on this page, and it's quite a good article, goes into a little bit more detail if you're interested in this.